So it is my pleasure to introduce Chris Marquis. Let me just tell you a little bit about Chris. And I'm going to sound like I'm exaggerating, but I am not exaggerating, okay? Like Chris is one of the most prolific management scholars, I'm just going to say, of my generation, if not the most prolific. I haven't been really counting papers and stuff, but he has definitely, every time you try to research a topic, he has
Come on.
in a top journal. So this is, it's not easy to accomplish that while also, you know, spending time in China, talking to the Chinese premier and writing, I don't know, 20, 30 cases on social innovation and social entrepreneurship. He teaches mostly social entrepreneurship and social innovation, but he has a long career teaching all sorts of things. And he's originally from the University of Michigan. He got a PhD in sociology and business administration with pretty interesting people there. And if you read his bio, like he basically, his dissertation won all the possible awards. He's been, you know, like nominated and runner-up for the Aspen Institute Faculty Pioneer Award a couple of times. I mean, he's as much an innovator as an amazing scholar. And his book, the book that he's going to be talking about today, Better Business, is definitely an interesting introspection into capitalism as it is today. I thought it was going to be more like popular and kind of like trying to connect, but it's also a very serious scholar examination of capitalism and some of what is wrong with capitalism. So I'm looking forward to the presentation, Chris. I hope I'm not missing anything. Let me just say that he's L.C. Johnson Professor in Sustainable Global Enterprise at Cornell University. And it's a pleasure to have him here today. And he wants 30 or so minutes uninterrupted so that he can present the argument. He allows clarification questions, but he wants to have a sort of like more broader discussion at the end. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, wow. Thank you, Aldo. That was, I think, maybe the kindest and truly most exaggerated introduction I've ever had, but it was nice. It's sort of, I'm here, I'm visiting the UK, as some of you might have heard. It's sort of, it's late in the day, so that got me sort of, fired up. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be with all of you. I wish I was there in person. And we can go out in the evening for a beer or something like that. I was saying, I lived in Boston for about 10 years, and I can't believe I've never been to Brandeis. And I lay that on Aldo's feet because he never he never invited me. So as Aldo mentioned, I've written this book recently. It's called Better Business: How the B Corp Movement is Remaking Capitalism. And a couple, I guess, sort of high-level points. So one. This book is actually written for a more general interest audience. I have put a couple slides in there trying to connect it to teaching and research, just because I heard this was going to be, sort of a lot of faculty. But the argument will be relatively general, and you can feel free to ask me any questions as we go. It sort of is sometimes hard in Zoom to sort of see people raising their hands if you're sharing the screen. So you can yell, you can say, hey, Chris, stop if you want. I mean, I'm happy to entertain them. So the general argument of the book is, you might think from the title, it is that I'm saying there should be more B Corps in the world. And some of you might know what that is. Some of you might not. At the end of this talk, I hope you know what it is. But, regardless, if you don't know what it is, that's fine at this point, but you may think I want more of those kind of companies. And it's not that I don't want more of the B Corps, but the argument of the book is much more that the tools and processes that have been developed by a community of entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, lawmakers, investors, is really useful to help business transition from more of a shareholder primacy model to more of a stakeholder capitalism type of model. There's a lot of talk about that these days. How to do it, who knows? Is it just greenwashing? Probably a lot of it is. And so these tools and processes that I'm going to talk about, I feel are really helpful and essential help all businesses, not just B Corps, but all businesses transition to more of a stakeholder orientation. Okay. So I think that this is, I think the timing on this book, I got very lucky in some ways, because it's not like a New York Times bestseller, but it got a little bit more attention than I think it would have. And I got a couple sort of op-eds and opinion pieces that probably would not have, were we not undergoing this, sort of fundamental re-examination of our system brought about as a result of COVID-19, all of the, sort of horrible examples of sort of racial injustice and, continuing Me Too type effects. I wrote the book before COVID, and then, actually I had the page proofs in I think they were due like March 20th, 2020, and the book was going to be published in I think June or July. And I said, to hold the presses, I mean, I have to add some text on COVID because it's going to, be totally weird. And then it got delayed to the fall. So it was published in September of 2020. Be totally strange to have, a book out without anything about COVID. So I was able to weave that into the argument a bit. But, again, I think it's a sort of relatively good timing because there is all this discussion now that we need to build back better. Part of that is having a more sort of resilient, sustainable, economic system. And I think that this, the argument I'm going to put forth sort of cuts right to the core of that. So you guys are an academic audience. I'm sure Milton Friedman, his sort of famous the social responsible business is to increase profits essay in the New York Times Magazine in 1970. Just celebrated the 50th anniversary of this. Actually, my book was published on the 50th anniversary of this to the day. It's when the publication was delayed to September. I was sort of complaining about it to a friend, and he said, that's actually when Milton Friedman's article was published. You should have them publish it on the exact day. And so I figured, may as well. Didn't help me. I really wanted to get, the New York Times actually had, all these famous economists, business leaders like, Mark Benioff, whatever. They had actually a section in the paper that day on the 50th anniversary of this essay. So huge impact on the laws that we have, on people's ideas of what it means to be a firm. If you look, actually, he very much was reacting to, the ideas of managerial capitalism, which certainly was not an ideal system, but, employees had pensions, companies took care of their communities. I think that they thought a little bit more long-term about maybe, broader sets of issues. And the thing that when we transitioned to a much more stakeholder focus, and this all throughout the 80s and 90s, the rise of agency theory as sort of a guiding ideology of corporate governance. The idea of stock options, I think, is tremendously key to this issue. How this idea of focus primarily on shareholders really distorts the decision making of corporate leaders. Makes them much more short-term oriented as opposed to being thinking about sort of more long-term issues. So the argument or part of the argument that I make, and this is not my argument, I mean, this is something that other folks make as well, that sort of the short-term focus has created a number of systemic issues. The mechanisms around short-term focus have created a number of systemic issues. One of which is economic inequality. If you just look at this is a simple graph, which in a general interest audience maybe it's more shocking than to you guys, but the level of CEO to worker compensation has just skyrocketed as sort of the stock option prevalence has increased. I mean, you can see even when Milton Friedman was writing in 1970, the average CEO to worker pay was around 20 to 1. Up some years it's upwards of 350 360. I also, and there's some evidence to this as well, that the short-term orientation really limits the investments in pollution abatement, and makes it more likely that companies are exploiting their externalities, sort of a tragedy of commons type problem in some ways. I know that this is, when I was invited and you asked me to speak about this book, you said it was sort of climate change week, and I think that this connects a little bit to the issues of climate change with pollution, greenhouse gases, and I think that this focus on shareholders and short-term orientation is a really big reason why we're in the situation we're in. So I'm not some crazy left-wing academic saying this. I mean, other people I think that are much more sort of mainstream and sort of surprising in some ways have recognized this sort of focus on shareholders has created a myopia in corporate leadership that is an issue. So the Business Roundtable, which I'm sure you probably know about, this trade group of CEOs of the 200 largest companies in the United States, issued the statement, got a lot of press, that they're changing their sort of definition of what the purpose of a company is, and the purpose of the company is to benefit all stakeholders, such as employees, communities, the environment, et cetera. Prior to this, it was actually explicitly focused on shareholders. So this is, I think, good, nice, sort of impressive, or I don't know, impressive is not the right word. Sort of, this is evidence that this is a, incredible, increasingly widespread idea. The World Economic Forum in 2020, the focus of the meeting was transitioning to stakeholder capitalism. Larry Fink is talking a lot in his letters about focus on ESG, which is part of this whole story. So anyway, so there's a lot of momentum around these ideas. And even Elizabeth Warren and Marco Rubio agree. I mean, there's a few things. I mean, maybe China might be another thing. There's some overlap nowadays, but back a little bit ago, this was really, I think, a unique situation. So Elizabeth Warren, the senator that represents you folks in Massachusetts, had as part of her presidential campaign platform something called the Accountable Capitalism Act, and this Accountable Capitalism Act was actually, recommended sort of national charters for companies, and the corporate governance provisions actually were based on some of the B Corp ideas that I'll be talking about in a bit. But it's the idea that making the corporate governance of firms focus much more on stakeholders. Marco Rubio, he and his office issued a report, American Investment in the 21st Century, calls shareholder primacy as the cancer that's killing American competitiveness, and that we need to focus much more on sort of long-term and more stakeholder ideas. But this is something that's easier said than done. I mean, I mentioned greenwashing on the first slide. This is something that, it's really easy to talk the game of like transition to stakeholder capitalism, but it's actually much harder to actually, walk the talk. Some of the Business Roundtable companies have been sort of outed for not really following through. The pandemic hits, they lay off all their employees, which is understandable. I mean, I think in many cases, I'm not, that's obviously business goes to nothing. I mean, you can't expect the companies to necessarily, sort of continue paying their workers forever. However, what they did still do then is, in many cases, still paid, sometimes increased their dividends, and paid their executives, sometimes increased their, gave their executives raises. So, this is, they're still, not really focused on broader sets of stakeholders, but actually very much on shareholders. And part of the thing is that, the corporate law, securities law, we can go into a lot of this, is really focused on the idea of shareholder primacy. even norms and culture in our world are focused on this. So, this is something where, to actually make this transition, you need actually tools and processes. You can't just talk about it. So this is where I think that the B Corp model really comes in to be very useful. And this is something that is used by many other companies than just B Corps. These things I'm going to talk about. So the y-axis is they have developed a ESG measurement, benchmarking, tracking, reporting, transparency tool called the B Impact Assessment. This is now integrated with the UN SDGs, so companies can actually, see how they can work to address the Sustainable Development Goals. This is something that's used by hundreds of thousands of companies, not just B corporations. This ESG management tool, and along the sort of bottom here, x-axis, is a new type of company that has been pioneered, legal changes in US states and many countries have now been made over the last 10 years to develop not a C Corp, which is more of a shareholder primacy focus or investor primacy focus, but a company that embeds stakeholder stakeholder accountability and purpose into the legal foundation of the company, the Articles of Incorporation. Okay. So when you sort of do both of these, and there's tens of thousands of these benefit corporations, and there's hundreds of thousands of people use this ESG, and then sort of when you cross them, you get above a certain standard on the ESG assessment, you can become a B Corp if you want. Here's some of the sort of well-known companies that have gone through this, from Roshan, which is an Afghanistani telecommunications company, largest employer in Afghanistan, to Patagonia, which everyone knows, to many others.
Do you have any really big companies? I love King Arthur Flour, but
yeah. So I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end. It has actually been spreading to big companies within the last year. I would say, so when I first started studying this, it was small, medium companies, but in the last couple of years, it has been, and I'll mention this, I have a couple slides on this, has been increasingly embraced by large companies, and like Danone is an example. There's a number of, Natura, I don't know. I'll talk a little bit about more of that, but I think that's a good point. I think investors is also another sort of key constituency that has come along and had some change in the recent years.
I can imagine if let's say that you have something that has been a publicly traded company, I purchase shares, and then you have the company attempt to convert to
right.
I can imagine objecting, saying, look, I purchased my shares with a sort of a good faith understanding that have you had any lawsuits about the permissibility of
So, I mean, we are like right on, I think, the cutting edge of this right now. So the majority of B Corps are companies that and there's only a handful of them that are public. Most of them are B Corps before they IPO. They're in the last, actually, literally 2 months, there have been 2 publicly traded companies that have changed their articles of incorporation through shareholder vote. Both got over, and I have a slide on that too, but both got over 99% support. Actually, the CEO of one of them actually just came to my class, and I'll talk about that in a second. But those are good questions.
Have you had investment managers get sued by their investors for holding shares? Like, I can imagine if I'm investing in a mutual fund and the mutual invest.
So like I said, the number of public this public company aspect of this is relatively new. So it's been untested yet, but I'll say a little bit more. Every single major VC firm is investing in these companies, and so they're want an exit. So I anticipate that over the next 5-10 years, there's going to be many of these companies going public, just because that's the natural, sort of VC model. So these things will be tested. And the thing is that, it's, you look at the S1 of companies, like there's a company Lemonade, which is an online insurance company, which is a B Corp, went public. You read their disclosures, and they say this as they disclose this as a potential risk, that they are a company that maximizes stakeholder value, not shareholder value, and that this could lead to lower returns. And yeah.
Very quick question: is there a benefit, yes, tax benefit, or something like that? Why?
Well, there's no tax benefit.
No.
Okay,
go ahead.
I'll talk more about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's these are good. I appreciate you guys asking these questions. I'm going to not skip this. I have a slide on sort of how you can teach with the book. I have a teaching sort of my, many people here worked at HBS. I had to write a teaching note for this, so I have a teaching note which is online. You can go on my website and get it, and it goes over all this. This is something where there's a ton of interesting research ideas, and since this is a sort of more academic crowd, I'm just listing a couple things. This legislation, which I'll talk about, so keep this in the back of your mind. This is now spread to at least 10 to 15 countries. I'll tell you the story of it, how it started in the US. Sort of greenwashing issues with the ESG reporting. One of the things that I'm surprised that, finance might study it more, but the different ownership structures that exist in the world, there's, employee-owned, co-ops, mutually owned, family-owned, typical VC, PE, and public companies. And so, this is an interesting laboratory because there's all these type of companies. Someone could, there's geographic clustering of this phenomena. Sort of interesting to think about why. Okay, so let me dive into, so just some quick ideas about research that could be done in this context, or more sort of deep and systematic research. The data actually of these companies is publicly available, so you can download the database. It's on what is the data? It's called data.world. I don't know if you're familiar with that website, data.world. It's a database or it's a site that you can download a bunch of data. It's actually a B Corp itself, the company data.world.
Chris,
yes.
I think, I don't know if you said it, or to get the B Corp logo, to get sort of like the
yes,
the stamp of approval, is it B Labs that gives you that?
Correct.
That's the only way to certify yourself.
Yes. So there is a independent third-party nonprofit that does the certification. They've now actually, the certification standards are actually done by a separate organization because there could be potential conflict of interest there. So there is this nonprofit that, and they do, so if a company, let's say, wants to become a B Corp, they fill out this B impact assessment. If they score above an 80, it's scored across these different, governance, workers, consumers, community, environment. They submit it to B Lab. There is a checking process of a random percentage of the answers, and I think it's 3%. They actually do an on-site audit, randomly selected. But so this is sort of the process by the certification body. Yeah, thank you. Oh, that's good. Thanks. Here's an example. Patagonia, very high scoring, and sort of two things I want to illustrate. So one, you can imagine Patagonia, well known, does very well in environment, does very well in community. But also, one of the things when I've interviewed now probably about 100 of these companies, and what they tell me is that how it's a spur for continuous improvement, because just going through this rigorous, basically management toolbox process, helps identify gaps actually within the tool. There's a variety of benchmarking. You can see what other companies are doing. So it's a real management learning process. And this is interestingly, what Larry Fink's rationale for why companies should report on ESG is that, sort of it's about long-term risk management, better management systems and quality. So they've, with Patagonia, you can see here, they get to, 2011, and the standards actually are getting a little bit progressively harder over time. They're renewed every 2 to 3 years. 107, and then they're up to 151, which they're still at, which is an incredibly high score. I mean, there's like, maybe 1% of the companies are higher than that, even though the top is 200. Okay, so the reason why I titled the book Better Business is that, so many of the companies I talked to said, we got into this because we were, passionate about the social, environmental mission. We wanted to actually hold ourselves accountable. We wanted to be part of a group of sort of like-minded peers. They said, what we came out of it, and the biggest conclusion is that we just were a better business, and the reason why is that, here's just some quotes, making a lot of intangible things more tangible, a way to continuously improve and deeper engage in your business. You can compare and learn, et cetera. So this is something where, this is a big reason, Ben, why a lot of these companies do it, because they now there's a much more sort of understanding this is a way to actually help make the management of your company more systematic, and as a result, save money, and last longer over the long term.
Not much different from Six Sigma in that sense. Basically, it's a Hawthorne effect.
What's that?
Not much different from the Six Sigma policies.
Okay.
That also just basically got you to pay attention to what you were doing.
Yeah, and if you measure it, and it's a way that you can say, okay, I see how I can improve.
Right.
That's actually the Global Reporting Initiative, which you're probably familiar with, sort of a more well known, used by larger companies. They actually sort of got its start from Ceres, which is a Boston-based NGO, and then sort of GRI moved to the Netherlands. And talking to some of the early people, they said, this is our change strategy, that if companies actually measure something, then they'll the next year want to get better. It's sort of natural to not want to fall. And so there is this just in actually measuring something is a natural continuous improvement. So this is a select list of investors. Someone had asked earlier about large companies. When I first started studying this, so the first HBS case I wrote on B Lab, which is the nonprofit that Aldo mentioned, was in 2010. They were founded in 2006. And I've done a bunch of case studies in a variety of B Corps. And when I would teach this at
question.
Sure, yeah, great.
So better business, but how good a business do you have to be to begin with to be able to take this on? I mean, like startups, given the huge failure rate for startups, how good do you have to be able to move to this maybe next level of good business?
Yeah, so I would say that, the people that go through and become B Corps, you have to, it's a big stretch if you actually are not very well run and you try to actually become a B Corp. There are some folks that have told me they've really increased their sort of, management and social responsibility capacity over a number of years working through this. But these tools, like I said, 100,000 plus companies are using this. Any company can use this to become more systematic and manage their company better. So that's really the message. One of the messages of the book is that you don't have to be a B Corp. It's actually really hard. Maybe it's not the right thing for many companies. It does take time. If you're a startup, maybe you don't want it. There is a certification cost. It's not large, but you can still use these tools to actually help you manage your company better. So, and I think that's
quick question,
Sure.
Chris. Where does this SASB measure falls into the social accounting? The JetBlue is using, and I use that case for.
Yeah. So I think it's a very consistent type of system. I think the couple differences. SASB is frequently used by larger companies. It's more designed for larger companies. This got its start more for sort of smaller entrepreneurial companies. Another difference is that this is a, can result in a certification process. So there's more of a, valuation of what is right and what is wrong in this system, or what is more valued and what is not. Whereas I think, SASB is more of a neutral sort of things that you report on, if that makes sense. So one of, I'm talking about this sort of better business idea. And I think, one of the things as I've taught on this and sort of researched this over the years that has really been a huge change is the embrace of these companies by mainstream and even the growth of the impact investing world. So, like I said, when I started teaching, people would say, this is great for Patagonia. Patagonia is owned by 4 people. They can do whatever the hell they want. Mainstream investors, let alone public companies. Now there's a lot of public companies that are this. But start this idea of investing for impact or impact investing is only a relatively recent phenomena. Actually, B Lab was involved in sort of these early discussions. The Rockefeller Foundation in 2007 with a report coined that name. There's a lot of specialized investment firms that are doing this impact investing. And many of them, all of those there are B Corps themselves. So one of the benefits that companies find also, Ben, is that it actually enters you into this network of impact investors. And many of them, like for instance, Bridges, I don't know if you Bridges, Brian Tresteld, I don't know if you know him, he teaches at HBS now, is one of the managing, or maybe still the managing partner in the Bridges New York office. They require all their companies to go through this. So all the companies that they are investing in are required to go through this tool. So there's been this rise in impact investing where companies can actually, or B Corps can be part of this, part of this ecosystem. But in addition, this has spread to mainstream VC firms too. So, I think the next slide says, there's been, over 2 billion in the last couple of years into these B Corps and 150 venture investors. You can see here, I'm sure you recognize those names of, some of the most high status, well-known VC companies in the world are investing in these companies. Starting to go public. So just since COVID hit, a number of these companies have gone public. Most recently, Coursera had a sort of blockbuster $6 billion IPO just a number of days ago. Lemonade, I think, was the highest performing IPO of 2020. Online insurance company. It was sort of an amazing. Daniel had a very skeptical look when I said that. So you could fact check that. It was up like 60% or something like that. Maybe it wasn't but it was very. It's up there. Lemonade, I don't know if you guys know this company. It is a totally revolutionary model. I've interviewed their CEO as well, but I'll just tell you because you sort of might be interested. So there is an inherent conflict of interest in the insurance business where, insurance company wants to pay lower premium, or excuse me, insurance company wants to pay out less for claims. People know this, so they exaggerate things. The company spends a lot of money investigating things, and it's sort of this really negative spiral. So Lemonade, and there's a variety of people like Dan Ariely that have sort of helped them understand, use sort of behavioral economics and finance to sort of, help create better incentives for people. What they do is you pay into you pay your insurance premiums. It goes into a big pot. Lemonade takes 25% off the top. That is their fee. Everything else goes to pay claims. If they pay out less claims, the money goes to nonprofits that you as a policyholder choose. If the policy, and they also buy reinsurance for times like hurricanes, et cetera. So it's sort of taking this conflict of interest. There's a new model of insurance where it's taking the inherent conflict of interest out of it. App Harvest has a 60-acre indoor farm in Kentucky, just finished. Martha Stewart is actually an advisor on the board, an investor, because the stuff they produce tastes so good, by doing it in a sort of ecological way. Vital Farms, another example, a company that does pasture-raised egg and dairy. So like I mentioned to Daniel's question, so there have been 2 companies in the last number of months that have taken shareholder votes and passed and changed into this new type of company, benefit corporation. I think one of the most interesting one is this Viva Systems. It's market cap, I think, of about 40-50 billion, cloud computing company for the healthcare and life sciences industry. This guy Peter Gassner came to my class on Wednesday to tell the students about this. And I'm teaching right now at Cornell Tech, which is our technology focused program. And so this is one of the reasons I had him, because it's a tech company. And so the students were, they think that if you have a good idea and can write some software, that it's like your life is taken care of. But he is so focused on sort of the leadership and management of the firm. The first company to do this, so he said it took them about a year to, they had to meet with the SEC. They had to do a variety of different things. They had to have a public comment period where they sort of announced they may do this. They had to obviously socialize it with their investors. But I think it's a big deal and step, and we'll see what more companies follow. What does this mean to be a benefit corporation? So the company in its transitions its articles of corporation in a way that it has a avowed purpose beyond just providing profits to shareholders. So it's the idea of creating a material positive impact on society and the environment. And importantly, and this is like one of the most essential things in my mind, is then accountable. It has to report and track, but via some third-party standard. It could be B Lab, it could be SASB, could be GRI, on these impacts that it says it's going to be responsible for. And this is something where a lot of people criticize stakeholder ideas because they say basically accountability to everyone is accountability to no one, which I think is true. But I think that these different tools are ways for businesses to hold, or for the public and for others to hold people accountable. So I think that businesses can be accountable to broader sets of stakeholders. Okay.
Chris, a question about reporting
Sure.
on standards of what they've done. What happens? Do we know something about B Corps that actually let their certification lapse, and what happens afterwards? I think Etsy and Warren Parker were two where when the IPO came close, or discussions about an IPO, they both kind of let it let it slide. They discontinued the certification, but did their behavior?
Good question. Yeah, so it's interesting. I don't know. So I actually, when I wrote the book, really tried to talk to these folks to understand. So when Warby Parker was 30-person company, I wrote an HBS case about them, so I know the CEO. I wish I had actually asked them if I could invest in them. I'd probably wouldn't be working anymore. So actually the Etsy founder, Chad Dickerson, actually is on the faculty of Cornell Tech, and I've tried to Chad Dickerson refuses to talk about it. Neil Blumenthal and his team, the CEO of Warby Parker, won't go on the record. What had happened actually, I mean, it's sort of interesting because this benefit corporation phenomena. So this is a newer phenomena. So the first state in the U.S., Maryland, passed this type of law in 2010, and then it spread throughout the U.S. Delaware, obviously the home of U.S. corporate law, was the most important. I think it passed in around 2015, 2016, and then it has spread to a few countries in Europe. Canada as a whole, it has been, I understand, considering it, and then a number of countries in Latin America and Africa. Rwanda just passed it, and it's sort of other Latin American countries are also considering it. So to your question, who asked that question? That's a good question.
I did.
I can't
Chris,
see you.
Philippe
I'm sorry.
Wells.
Philip Wells.
Okay, Philippe, great. So the issue and the reason why Etsy and Warby Parker ended up deciding not to continue their certification is that the standards before this idea of benefit corporation came into being were just based on the B impact assessment. They were just based on that ESG measurement tool, basically. But when they started passing these laws, the certifying body said, you know, your practices need to be aligned with your governance. You know, you can't just actually say you're doing it. You know, so they inserted a requirement that if you're incorporated in a jurisdiction that has benefit corporation legislation, you have to convert to a benefit corporation. And I think to Daniel's question, you know, that's like, you know, many investors may balk at that. And so there's a cohort of B Corps, Etsy and Warby Parker being two of them, where they decided to actually not, you know, their investors would not, and their boards would not said, we're not going to change the type of company. This is some new, potentially crazy thing. I think now, I mean, the Warby Parker people that I talked to said, you know, now that there's companies gone IPO, you know, we probably would do it, but back then it was so untested. So yeah, so there's a number of companies in that cohort that, and I, you know, this is something that, so I wrote a second HBS case on B Lab in 2015 about this Etsy decision. You know, what should B Lab do? They're going to lose all the poster child companies that get them so much press and attention. You know, should they actually, you know, maybe grandfather people in? Should they weaken the standards? And I give B Lab a lot of credit for saying, you know, we are going to stick by our standards, and we think that if, you know, you are actually saying you're doing these, you know, and getting tracked and measured on these ESG purpose issue, you should actually have that in your governance as well. And if we lose a bunch of companies, I mean, that's, you know, our certification has to mean something. So that's sort of the story behind that. Some companies converted, like Kickstarter, for instance, you know, as an example, was an early and poster child B Corp, and they ended up converting to a benefit corporation. Okay. I'm just going to say this very, you know, just very quickly. I think from your questions, this is clear, but sometimes people get confused because the names sort of sound similar. So the certified B corporation is the certification for achieving a certain performance threshold given by the B Lab nonprofit. Benefit corporation is a type of company that exists in 30 plus US states and all these countries. You don't have to be certified. You do have to have some accountability for the purpose that you articulate, though.
Chris, I don't know if this is the right moment to ask you this.
Sure.
It does seem to me that the type of firms that are getting certification are maybe using this as a marketing sort of strategy, that they are a lot of consumer products or products where like having the B Corp certificate or actually gets you traction with the kind of customers you have.
Right.
I think, I don't know if I haven't been paying attention before to whether some of the companies that you have on your list and all of that are, let's say, B2B companies or companies that are not either consumer products or like the insurance company you talked about, like something where like it's really not about marketing to the customer, but it's really about the company adopting these standards because this is the right thing to do.
Yeah. So good question. So I think, you know, part of the reason why you think that is that that's sort of in some ways the poster child that everyone trots out to say, oh, this is a B Corp. Actually, from what I understand, I was just told by one of the B Lab founders that there's more B2B B Corps than B2C. Some of these, sort of interesting, I mean, there's this really interesting company called Cascade, which is a plastic injection molding company. Your recycling bins very well may be made by them. Trash cans. They are one of the, sort of a company that I've interviewed, and they do it. This kicked off they're actually very into like social justice issues, but also kicked off all kinds of sustainability programs. And they went zero waste as a result of starting this, which ends up saving them, they calculate 280,000, 7,000 a year, just from saving waste. So there is the consumer point I'll get to in a little bit. I think that's actually a potential weakness.
And I did read about Cascade in your book, so I should have known.
Okay, no problem. I think it's a good question because I do think the examples that people throw out are the ones you want people to know them, or another one that's really interesting. Someone asked about big companies, Godovian, which is a Swiss fragrance maker. So everything from all the smells that underlie all this sort of food and other sort of or sort of health and beauty products. No one knows of it. Is in the process of becoming a B Corp. I think it's the largest fragrance company in the world, very large company out of Switzerland. Great. So another benefit that people really articulate, someone said to me, they're in sort of an unusual industry for a B Corp, and so they say, our competitors say, why do this B Corp thing? And they say the main reason why, I never have to think about HR. Many of the companies report to me that, since going through this, their retention is through the roof compared to their, what it was before, and their competitors, attraction of talent. Athleta, which is a B Corp, told me that, now people come to work for them because they're a B Corp. So you think about the war for talent nowadays, getting sort of smart and motivated millennials, Gen Z. Purpose, social responsibility, something's very important, and a number of B Corps from Athleta, New Belgium Brewery is another one. Cabot Cheese. All of these told me that 25+% of the people that apply to them, it says, why do you want to work for us? And people have some variation of because you're a B Corp. So, sort of the HR attraction retention benefits in this are likely large. It's not been systematically studied, but there has been a lot of studies on how purpose helps attraction and retention more broadly, so this is very consistent with this anecdotal information is very consistent with that.
Actually, Chris, on that note, on the Athleta note, could you talk a little bit about what happens when a B Corp gets acquired? So I'm assuming that Athleta was a B Corp before they were bought by Gap.
Yeah, so I'll say a little bit about subsidiaries. So there are so if you're a legally separate subsidiary, you can be a B Corp. It's sort of like, there's if you're owned by a bunch of VCs, it's not actually, it's different in some ways, but it's sort of, you have an investor, just you're wholly owned by another company. So if you're a legally separate subsidiary, and the transparency guidelines are different. They require, if you are a subsidiary, you have to go through much more, be much more transparent about what you actually report to B Lab. But yeah, there's a number of companies, and I have a slide on that in a bit, that are subsidiaries of larger ongoing concerns. Yeah, good question. Thank you. One of the things I learned for this, and I think I want to do some more systematic research on it, but something that, at least in the management literature, there's not a lot of work on employee ownership. And this is something where, this guy, Jeffrey Hollander, I don't know if you've heard of him. He's pretty well known in the sustainability space. He's co-founder of Seventh Generation. I interviewed him a couple times for this book. And he said to me in his, he tried to get part of the reason, actually, many of the reasons why he ended up exiting on, not his choice from seventh generation, as he was, pushing employee ownership in a big way. That he actually started with his daughter. After that, a sustainable sex products company, and that's employee owned. But he said to me, you can't be a responsible business without being committed to employee ownership, because otherwise your business acts in a way to concentrate wealth, which is totally true. I mean, if you're investing in, if you're owned by VC, PE, even families, as the company grows, I mean, the owners are the ones that are really gaining from that, and not the employees. So that actually had, I think, a big influence on my thinking, and one of the things I learned through this project. And I think that I'm going to do some more work on this. But another thing in today's day and age that is just so incredibly salient and important is issues of diversity, inclusion, justice, equity. Actually companies measuring, tracking these issues is so vital. And I think that, a lot of the interventions talk about, policy, even sort of individual bias issues. I think the corporate level piece of discrimination is not as fleshed out. And I think that it's, even if you look at, like, the SEC is now talking about ESG reporting, mandatory, it's about climate change, which is certainly important, but, it should also be about, diversity, equity issues as well. Many of the companies that I talked to told me, because this was actually an area that I dove into in a lot of the interviews, that when they went through this assessment, they thought they were, they're socially committed, focused on the environment. They thought they would do great, but actually turns out they identified a number of, like, for instance, pay inequities between men and women. Many companies told, and I give them a lot of credit for telling me that, and they were like, we are shocked that we have this. And this is, what issues of systemic discrimination are about, because they happen, through this, it's not, I mean, they're people that are, none of them are discriminatory probably, but, with some of the research has shown about sort of, negotiating salaries, actually men typically negotiate more aggressively than women. The way that salaries grow over time is usually percentage of base. And so you can see over time, there are, systemic inequities that are created within organizations and these companies, and so just the process of measuring and tracking these things really highlighted that. And so, obviously there's social justice reasons for, diversity, equity, inclusion, but, the thing is, and this, again, PowerPoint is for a more general interest audience, but, all kinds of, economic, psychology, sociology, political, whatever. I mean, there's, probably thousands of studies that show the variety of different ways, from innovative thinking, teamwork, productivity, how diverse teams are better. It's an international movement. So, started in the US, but is now global. Actually, there's more B corporations outside of the US than there are inside the US. Here's a few, Natura, which, to the question about large companies, it's a $10 billion, now traded on the New York Stock Exchange, also traded in Sao Paulo, a Brazilian cosmetics company, natural cosmetics company, sells through an Avon model whereby, they're trying to create economic development, entrepreneurship opportunities for their women sales force. They have purchased The Body Shop, which you might be more familiar with, and they also recently purchased Avon. So they now own, and Avon will become a B Corp. BDC, Business Development Bank of Canada. I just want to highlight this. They actually are, do a lot of lending to small businesses. As part of their lending process, they require their prospective lendees to actually go through the B Impact Assessment because they feel it's a valuable tool. Tony's Chocolonely, I don't know if you know, there was just in this last issue of Fortune magazine, a really great article about this company. I've interviewed the founders of this and the sort of the leaders of this company too. It's a company where it was started by a journalist. He was doing some reporting and learned that there was slavery, and I was shocked. Slavery, child labor, and child slavery in the chocolate supply chain. So if you're eating chocolate, you're eating products produced by slaves, and that is just like astounding to think of in today's day and age. And so he started this company to create and develop a traceable and fair supply chain system for the chocolate industry. So all the chocolate that or the cacao that they buy is traceable to non-slave and fairly produced chocolate. And yeah, so really good article about it in Fortune this last week. Okay, so someone asked about large companies. It's a challenge for large companies to do this. Both, many times they're public already, and as we talked, it's hard. Although companies are starting to do it, to actually convince your investors to change to a benefit corporation, it might be a challenge. But there's a lot of other companies too that are they're large and they're private, and they may be interested in doing this. And there's a lot in Latin America, family-owned firms. I think that's why there's a huge concentration in Latin America of B Corps. So an issue is that because the certification is relatively rigorous and you have to do it for all of the legal subsidiaries in your company, it's very complex. So I wrote a case study, actually when I was at HKS for a year and a half, published through HKS on Danone's North American operation. So Danone North America is a B Corp. It's a $6 billion company. Probably if you look in your refrigerator, if you have Oikos yogurt or Horizon organic milk or Silk soy milk or Danone, yogurts, probably you'll see the B Corp B logo on the back. So they had 5 or 6 legal subsidiaries, and it was and so they had to do separate certifications for all of them. It was a hugely complex process. So as large companies have become increasingly interested in this model, B Lab has created a new program to help companies collaborate and learn and have like a slower on-ramp to the system. So it's this B Movement Builders. This is the first 6 companies. They work as a cohort, share information. Bondaloo, which is a French vegetable producer. Godot, which is a Brazilian steelmaker. Godovian, which I mentioned, a Swiss fragrance maker. Magalu, which is a retailer in Brazil. Danone, which you probably know, $30 billion company. And Natura, which I've already mentioned.
Chris, can I
yes.
Just to say 2 things? Some people have to leave because there is an important faculty meeting.
Yeah, got it.
Now, and I know that you also have sort of like a hard stop in about 15 minutes.
I'll end in 1 minute.
Oh, excellent. So,
okay. So I mentioned subsidiaries, lots of subsidiaries. Maybe 2 minutes. So one of the things that I think is really important is that they have integrated this with the UN SDGs, so that companies can learn what SDGs or they're focused on, they can focus on, and then track progress towards it. The SDGs are built mainly for societies and governments, and I think that operationalizing them for a company level is hugely important. One of the SDGs is this SDG 12 is, responsible consumption for production. And I must say that, there is a real interest in people consuming from socially responsible companies, but there's a gap in actually being able to identify them. I think that this B Corp logo helps consumers identify them, but I don't think it's gone that far yet. Just as my concluding comment, I'll say, I think that this movement has come a long way in convincing investors, in convincing lawmakers, and creating these laws. But I think there's still, we as individual consumers need to be doing much more in being conscious consumers. And I think that over this next decade, I hope that this movement helps propel that idea to individual consumers, building on its strength from the other things. So, okay, there's a bunch of logos. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
And I know some people have to go and you have a hard stop, so I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions and
sure.
anyone else wants to jump in. But one that is very important for me is that it's not very clear to me. I know that the book is very aspirational. Like, what role do you, because you see the government as an important facilitator on the legal side, but you don't see like a regulatory role for governments where they can actually sort of maybe start adopting some of these things as part of regulation.
No, I mean, you're right. I mean, my strength is, background is much more on the company side. And so I think that I mean, the government is essential to this. So if the government were to mandate ESG reporting, across a broad set of metrics, I think that would be, I'm totally supportive of that. I think that would be great. I wrote something in the Hill that talks about that and the need to sort of expand it beyond just environment, also social and governance. And I think obviously the legal framework too, and so I think that I do, the book does focus on this, sort of grassroots movement, but I think the government has a huge role to play. And I hope that in the future they will play bigger and bigger roles because it's essential.
Awesome. Okay. No, I wasn't clear because in the book, it feels like you're talking about governments, but then it's more like a facilitating role rather than they could make the change in a way.
Yeah, no, if I would be very happy if they did.
If they did. I don't know if anyone has any other question. Some of the companies that you showed in that slide where you had all the Brazilian companies.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting, and I was thinking that maybe in places like in Brazil, there's a ton of impact investing funds that are concentrated on sustainability. The pension funds care about sustainability.
Right.
So there's like a virtuous circle where you have a separate stock index that is a sustainable stock index for the Bovespa. So I wonder if that virtuous circle is not something that you. I think you mentioned it because you talk a lot about investors and investors driving.
Yeah.
But it seems like it's a key place for that precisely because you all investors are now focused on sustainability.
Yeah. No, I think you're right, and I think that they're I wrote something in Forbes about how why it's getting such traction in Latin America and Europe, and I think that just the the models broadly speaking, and I mean some of the stuff you mentioned about Brazil I didn't know. I'd interviewed actually the head of B Lab Brazil for that, but I mean you're right. I think that some places there's more fertile ground for this than others, and I think ironically that it started in the U.S. I think the U.S. with the dominance of Wall Street and the Silicon Valley, ethos I think that it's, the U.S. is one of the least sort of fertile places for this around the world. I think that Europe and Latin America, the future of this movement is in Europe and Latin America. It's not in the U.S. It's big in Australia, the UK also, growing in Asia, growing in Africa.
You didn't talk too much about supply chains, which is another topic that I've researched.
Yeah.
In Brazil, for instance, meat packers are scrutinized.
Right.
It's amazing. Like you could see, like they track the cows, like they track the cattle. They see where the cattle is, so that to make sure that they're not burning the Amazon to expand production, things like that. Like I feel like that's another powerful way to connect what these backwards, right?
Yeah. So there is supply chain questions and things that the company has to do, and there's also work to extend this through the supply chain. So a number of companies that I talk to, they seek out B Corps to be suppliers, and they ask their big suppliers to actually go through that assessment process. They may not become B Corps, but at least they're able to have an idea of sort of where they stand. So it is. I agree. I mean, it's. We need to think about the whole sort of value chain of production, not just the focal company.
Yeah, because you could have governments, for instance, for procurement.
Right.
That could be something that encourages companies to actually get the certification.
Yeah, right. And to the point about someone asked about tax benefits, there's not that many sort of financial benefits, but there are procurement benefits. A number, these companies are included like, there's sort of certain classes of companies or NGOs that can get preferential procurement, and a number of places these B Corps are in those lists.
Awesome. I don't know if anyone has any. Yeah, Sandra.
I have a couple, actually related to what you just said, Chris. So are NGOs, governmental organizations, international organizations, are they using these tools as well?
Not so much. I mean, they're really designed for companies to track and manage their processes. So I'm sure some of the stuff they could, but it's much more focused on corporate behavior.
Okay, and another question would be, what advice would you give to people who are, the founders of like a tiny startup, like the classic found the company in your garage? Like, what advice would you give to them if they're interested?
Yeah, so they can go on the B Corp website, and there's it's called the SDG Action Manager, which is a smaller version. It's very quick to do. You can learn a little bit about your company. I think it takes like half an hour, 45 minutes, and get a sense of how your company stacks up. You might, learn something. I mean, I can understand that for, certain companies, I mean, this might be something they really like, but maybe it's priority number 5, and maybe they're not going to get it, get around to it until year 2 or whatever. But even by going through that early process and familiarizing themselves, they can, they'll probably sort of learn and be able to benchmark a little bit, but then also set themselves up for later on if they want to spend more time and energy on it.
Great, thank you. That's helpful.
Okay.
Thank you. And Chris, I don't know if you met Sandra before. Sandra is,
yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
And Philippe is teaching some of the sustainability courses. That's why he's asking you.
So I was asking that
great.
question about Etsy and Warby Parker.
Yeah. Philippe, if you so if you, I mean, I'm happy to send. I have slides for the whole book because I teach it. I've taught it twice now to my students at Cornell. Actually, I'm right in the middle of teaching the third time now. So I have a whole set of slides for it. I'm happy to send you. They're on my website. If you look on my website, there's a teaching note that goes through in detail the various topics to teach from the book. So if you're interested, I'm happy to send all that stuff to you.
Oh yeah, that'd be great. And what's your email?
So it's cmarquis@cornell.edu.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
I might have it on my last slide. I should go to the last slide. Is it here? Yep, there we go.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Well, Chris, I want to thank you. I actually read some parts of the book, and it is a very fun read. Like, it's super easy to read. So I want to thank you for presenting it. If you haven't read it, it's actually a pretty good reading. And thanks so much for sharing it with us. I think most people got the message. I got a lot of messages while you were talking about this is a fun seminar, sorry I have to go, and things like that. So we appreciate that you took the time, and that you, even though you're in England, you could still.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to. It was great. Thank you for all the interesting questions, and enjoyed engaging. And like I said, I really hope next time I can come. I want to come visit Brandeis.
For sure, and let's make sure this is a conversation rather than just a presentation. That would be very cool. Thank you so much.